Hello there. Hope you're doing well. Another week begins. Begin the begin. I've just been doing a little bit of back and forth with Jenny, Nurse Jenny, in some comments, and it kind of led me to thinking about the subject of speaking out when you know something's wrong and what you're prepared to risk, what you would be prepared to give up by so doing. And it's clear that some people in certain situations, they've got a hell of a lot to lose, and they've got enormous pressures on them, and they've got concerns over there. But they've got a mortgage to pay, and they've got children, or may have children, and they've invested in a career of many years, and they've trained for it often, and it must be extremely hard, particularly when you know that the institution or organisation you work for is absolutely merciless when it comes to individuals standing up against something that institution doesn't want you to do, doesn't want you to say publicly. And I was just thinking about, I was thinking about myself in the sense that I've never been in any kind of status position in the world of work. I've always been in sort of entry-level jobs and moved around at that level. And I've never really feared losing any particular job because I never really invested in it. I mean, sometimes I stayed there longer, but I've never felt I had a career there, in any particular organisation. So it has come up in the past, in the distant past, where I've spoke out about certain things, and it has led to what I know was a constructive dismissal, for example, on a couple of occasions in different situations. But that wasn't a career, in the sense of like training for many years for it, and feeling as though I can fall from that height now. So I've never felt in an employment situation tested in that way, with regard to the pressure points that they know many people have, and particularly if they're, that they've got a lot of payments to make every month, and in terms of like a family and high level mortgage and everything. I've never had a mortgage. I've not had children, not had a family. So all those pressure points are potentially absent. So why am I saying all this? It came out of the conversation with Jenny that it must be extraordinarily difficult to risk everything, knowing that you're risking everything that you've worked for decades. And yet some people do it, and they are the outliers, like Dr. Pittman. And I mentioned to Jenny the case of Dr. Bolsin would be another person. And obviously Lucy Letby is such a person as well. And look what they've done to her. Look what this evil system, this combine of a system of these state institutions have done to her. And all the people, I mean, who would speak up for her? Who did speak up for her then in that world? Well, some people did to a certain level, and then they stopped. I think it was Karen Rees, wasn't it, that was very supportive of Lucy. And then there's that short interview. You see that Karen Rees is incredibly troubled that she. Now, I hope I've got this right from memory, that she allowed herself to be convinced, or by her legal representations, that it wouldn't be in her interest to go on saying that she believes Lucy Letby is innocent. But she had done for quite a long time. And then she made a statement about saying, well, reversing that effectively. And then subsequently she made a further statement saying I'll always regret doing that for the rest of my life because I believe she is innocent. So that's the kind of turmoil it puts people in, doesn't it? Because they've got all, the employers, whether you've got a pension with them or you're still working for them, and they know this, they've got all these pressure points over you. And then it goes to an even higher degree where you get the most exemplary people like Stephanie Davis, standing up for for looking into a case where there's seems incredibly likely that there were murders by another party that the Cheshire Police have just simply let go, and they've closed them as a murder suicide, allowing a potentially serial killer to be loose and to have gotten away with multiple murders. And you get somebody of the caliber of Stephanie Davies, who is worth every detective at Cheshire Police times 1,000. And then they turn on her and then even try to get her convicted. And they even try to double down on that when the CPS don't want them to. Don't want the case. And then they try it again. That's how vindictive they are. It is like taking on. It's something. I mean, you hear about like gang culture and the idea you join a gang, a criminal gang. And if you want to get out of it, well, good luck with that. Good luck trying to get out with it or out of it, or certainly not speaking against it publicly. The same dynamics are there in institutions like the police and the NHS. There might come a tipping point in which, and it hasn't come yet, obviously, where a serving police officer starts to speak out publicly about this, but they'll be risking everything, and they know that. But thus far, and it is welcome, absolutely welcome, that a former police officer of high rank has been speaking out about it, and that's very good. It's not to knock that. That's very good and very helpful. But there's going to be no one, I don't think, until a certain point, and what that point is, I don't know, that where a serving police officer is going to say, the way Cheshire Police are behaving is just ridiculous. Not ridiculous, it's criminal, especially if they're working for Cheshire Police. Who's going to say that? Can you imagine the internal pressures or the pressures of being in Operation Hummingbird if you were an individual who thought, this is all insane, this Lucy Letby, I've spoken to her, or I've sat in an interview, and this isn't a murderer. None of this makes sense. But, well, my view on that is that you wouldn't end up in Operation Hummingbird unless you were of a certain, shall we say, a certain level of cognitive ability. You wouldn't end up in there if you were really smart. You just wouldn't, and that's what's so terrifying about it. It's one of the biggest criminal investigations they've had in decades, and it's absolutely necessary to have the individuals in that operation to not be very, in the most charitable way of putting it, to have almost zero critical thinking skills. And certainly be led by people of that nature, of those who completely lack those skills. Certainly be led by them, if not outright dishonest people. And I believe if we knew everything, and I think we know enough already to say, I think that the police have perverted the course of justice. CPS certainly has. But I believe the police would have done many times over if we only, so a case in point is obviously giving the, as we hear about in this, if it's true, if we hear about it, if we hear that a police officer gave Dr. Jayaram's notes regarding the skin rash to Evans, that's an example, isn't it? Anyway, there's going to be many of them, really. But they're acting criminally now. I mean, I think they have done all the way along to some degree, the police. But they're able to do that. They're able to be beyond the law in all sorts of ways. And that's what they do, and that's what they're able to do, and they can get away with it. And the very worst that can happen to them is a couple of years down the line, some complete knob high up who you've never seen before with one of those peaked cap comes out, he goes like, yeah, we're going to learn some lessons here, we'd like to apologise for this, and we extend our apologies, and we're going to do that, and they're going to, and then there'll be another big opening for some other little inquiry, and some individuals will make a few million quid on that as well. It's just all a it's just a merry-go-round all the time. Well, it's not merry, but it's just a sinister kind of merry-go-round, all that kind of thing. These fake inquiries, one after the other. So yeah, I'm dotting around now, but I want to say so much about so many things actually, but I'm also cognizant, or want to be cognizant, of not trying to split the focus and also kind of go off track, and also kind of undermine certain ideas of hope, really. The main breach that I have with I think the way the world is looked at generally is that, I don't know, I won't go down there. Just to say this, just because an institution is purported to be independent, and it's an institution of the state, why would you believe that it is independent? Because they say it is. It puts us into this state. I looked up the phrase false consciousness. I know it's a Marxist term, but I think there's this, and it's in the interests of power for everybody to be in a state of false consciousness about the reality of state institutions, and what drives them, and what drives the hierarchy of them. Somebody saying, I wasn't getting to the point the other day, and I don't care, because there's not one point to get to. It's a forest. It's walking through a forest, and I'm not looking for just one tree, so I can just hit my head against it and say that's the point. That's the point of the forest. No, it's a forest we're in, of deception and dishonesty, and how power affects the effects of power, and how it's meted out, and the fears that people are under, the grip of fear, and the pressure points many people are under. So just going back to the earlier thing about it's a lot harder when you've got a lot to lose, and I understand that imaginatively. It's not that I've got nothing to lose. Obviously, I've got somewhere to live. I didn't have somewhere to live a few years ago. That could happen again. So that is something somebody can hang over you. Also, your liberty. And with the police being what they are, they can actually, as we see, as they can go for you. They can go for you if they really want to. And I wouldn't trust them. There's nothing I wouldn't trust them not to do. The police. I'm not saying about me particularly, or anyone. There's nothing I wouldn't trust them not to do, to break the law, to go for someone. It's awful to think that way. I don't like thinking that way, and I'm not saying that's all of them all the time. It doesn't need to be all of them all the time. It just needs to be some of them when it's required, and for everyone else to be quiet about it. And that's the crucial thing, is the being quiet about it. But yeah, I've never been in the position of having to risk a career to speak out in the way that someone certainly like Lucy Letby did, by her very nature. She was just being her. She was being herself. She was doing what she was supposed to do, as was Dr. Pittman, as was Stephanie Davis, as was Dr. Bolsin, the anaesthetist in the Bolsin, Bolsin, in the scandal at the Bristol hospital. And he was then blacklisted. He did absolutely the right thing and saved lives, in terms of what would have happened had he not have acted. And then he was blacklisted from the NHS, could never get another job here, went to, I think it was either Australia or New Zealand, and told his story to the people who were wanting to employ an anaesthetist there, and they said, "You're exactly the person we want." Whereas the NHS attitude was, "No one's going to touch you now because you put the patients first." Because people were doing operations that they didn't have the skills to do, and children were dying, and people were dying. And he brought that to light, and he tried every other way to bring it to light, and he finally had to speak about it because people's lives were being lost. Because certain doctors were doing operations they didn't have the skill to do, and they were just sort of had that, felt they could do that, and just wouldn't stop, and didn't stop. And he stopped that happening. And the punishment is, and it's the same with Dr. Martin Pittman. He's addressing safety problems, and talking about mums' lives, babies' lives, and then he's out. And it doesn't have to be overt, and it will never be overt. There won't be like a thing in a banner across the town hall saying this person's never going to be employed again. It just doesn't happen. You can't do it. You don't get it. You don't get you'd never get the job. Simple as that. You're out, and you know it. You know you've been blacklisted. It happened to a chief executive of a trust some years ago. I could look him up, but I can't remember his name now. But I heard quite an in-depth, like 40-minute radio program about that. It was also to do with patient safety. And this is the chief executive of a trust. And he was warned and warned and warned that he was making decisions that would cost him dear, but he was a person of conscience, and he could never be employed again by the NHS. Or, no, he could be, but the NHS being what it is in terms of this kind of Stalinist kind of, whoever the people are that are making those decisions or ensuring that, what kind of culture is that then? I say Stalinist, it's just the idea that if you step out of line in terms of the power structure, if you make them look bad even though something is bad, you're going to be punished, and you're going to be persona non grata, It's over, game over for you, and that's just hideous, isn't it? It should be the opposite. You should be the most sought after. Dr. Pittman should be the most sought after, or should have, I watched the interviews with Dr. Pittman and Chris, and with Stuart, and that it came at a certain time in his life and his career, but in a reasonable, decent world, if that institution was decent and the way it operated was decent, and the people that I don't know how to describe what they do and what their jobs are, but how does that even happen? Is it just an understood thing that this person's no longer going to be employable then? Anyway, if it was decent, Dr. Bolson would be the most sought after anaesthetist from any NHS trust in the UK. Dr. Pittman would be the most sought after obstetrician. Stephanie Davies would be the most sought after coroner's officer. Actually, should be a high ranking detective, really. But they'd rather have these really low quality, low standard, non-detectives, just kind of time serving, totally non-critical thinking people there. And they're the kind of people that Stephanie Davies showed up for what they are. And they were pissed. They were mad. They were mad about that, It's almost like a tale as old as time. And I'm sure does it fall into this telling truth to power concept? Where you can tell the king the truth, but then you're going to probably get your head chopped off. Unless, I know this is about plays written by Shakespeare, but whether there was any truth in it or not in reality, unless you're this fool character in which you can You can tell the truth to power, to the king, but you're doing it in a way, you've got this license, you've got the fool's license. But the problem there is you're not going to be like a high-ranking consultant and a fool at the same time. They just don't go together. So what real effect can the fool have? And in today's world, who is the fool character? What fool characters have any purchase or influence on power? I don't watch television anymore. I haven't done it for ages, and the idea of, generally speaking, most stand-up comedians that I don't like most of them, because I just think they're, in many ways, they make out as though they're sort of challenging power, but very often they're really in support of even more extensive powers. That's the way I see it. But maybe that's because all that system's got sewn up. That system about who gets to be on television, who gets to be in comedy clubs. I'm sure it is, because I've watched channels where certain comedians, they're just they're out of the loop because they're not on message. They're not on message with certain cultural changes that are meant to be sort of read, and cultural memos that have been sent out apparently, and you're meant to just get that memo and understand and act accordingly. I'm watching a BBC documentary from 1973 about transgender discussion. It's an interesting documentary, looking at it for like 53 years ago. I put up a link on posts. It's a cup of tea. It's raining again. Yeah, there's no, it's silly for me to say, what somebody put a thing up about, well, why don't you get to the point? Well, I just don't, there's lots of points in there, but there's not just one point. I don't care if somebody doesn't think I don't get to the point. Don't care. I don't care. Am I bothered? No, I don't. It's just that I've noticed that it's just, we're talking about processes here. We're not talking about always, there are points. Of course there are points to be made. Of course there are many, many points to be made, and people with skill and experience are making those points, and they're all absolutely vital to be made, to do with certain medical aspects, and they're vital to be made. But I'm not a medical person, but for me it's more like, it's always been, what is the story of this? The play, it's like it's a drama, but it's real. It's real, and it has the qualities of kind of psychodrama for the people that are emotionally and intellectually and emotionally and spiritually, I would say, invested. That's a pain in my head now. Better stop, I think. I don't know, maybe something's trying to stop me speak. Invested, what was I saying? Something for all of us who are emotionally and spiritually well, it is spiritual. It is. For all of us that are that, it is like this kind of psychodrama, really. That's not meaning it's fiction. It's real. It's real. But I think that's why it's so disturbing, because it's real. Sometimes it doesn't feel real. It doesn't. Sometimes it feels just sort of like, this can't be going on. I don't know. But I really understand it's very hard for some people to, and Dr. Aiton, Dr. Sviljana Dimitrova, they're still working in the NHS, aren't they? I believe, and that they've taken a risk as well. I think it's going to be a cold day a cold day in hell before a serving police officer says anything about of a critical nature against Cheshire Police and their handling, I don't even know if that's the right word, the role they've played in this monstrosity of injustice and cruelty and viciousness and this great lie, the role they've played in this great lie, and they want to prop it up even further and double down, triple down on it. The worse they do, the more bad things Cheshire Police do, the more worse things they're going to feel they have to do in order to justify the worst thing that they just did. There's a line that Macbeth says in Macbeth where he says something like, I can't remember exactly, but it's like, he's already killed Duncan, the king, and I think he might have killed Banquo. And he says, well, I'm already over shoes in blood so far that it would be as tedious to go back as to go forward. In other words, so for Cheshire Police, they've already done so much wrong. They think their direction of travel is just to carry on doing more and more wrong things and just hoping that they can shut everyone up or find some final nail to nail down into the lid, But it can't work, and it won't work, and we're not going to stand for it, and we're not having it. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Take it. Keep warm, keep dry, and pass the ammunition. Thank you.